Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Tickets Please. I'm your host, Josiah Wampfler. On this episode, it's part one of my coverage of the 2026 Wisconsin Film Festival. First, I'll share a couple of my favorite films from the fest, Kontinental 25 and Do You Love Me? Then I sat down with Grant Phipps and Jason Fuhrman, two avid cinephiles and writers from Madison, as they discuss the most interesting films they saw at the fest. All that is ahead on this episode of Two Tickets Please. Director Radu Jude's Do Not Expect Too Much from the End of the World was one of my favorite films of 2024, so I was excited going into his latest, Kontinental 25. While not nearly as great as that previous film, I was impressed by how engrossing the film ended up being, given that it is essentially 109 minutes of a woman trauma dumping on every person she meets. The film follows Orsolia, a bailiff living in the Transylvania region of Romania, who is tasked with evicting a homeless man from the boiler room of a building that is to be replaced with luxury housing. She's given him extra time, but there is only so much she can do. Leaving to let him pack up his things, they return to find that he has brutally hung himself from the radiator. It's a clever commentary that Orsolia is at the center of this tale, hijacking what should have been the homeless man's story, even after his death. But while she, of course, isn't personally responsible for the man's death, Jude uses her impossible quest to cure her guilty conscience to speak to the housing crises occurring in nearly every Western capitalist country. We see the moral quandaries a lack of government action forces upon individuals who can be both well-meaning and cruelly ignorant, regardless of their personal politics. This is a film of conversations, and its strength lies in its wonderful writing. Nearly every character has the ability to be quite thought-provoking. Even characters that in one breath say the dumbest, most awful things imaginable, in the next are able to pull out something truly revelatory. The best example of this is a fantastic conversation between Orsolia and her priest near the end. But while the film does not focus a ton of energy on its visual language, it's shot in an iPhone and at times even uses autofocus, it chooses moments to be quite provocative. There are the comedic moments, the homeless man pissing on a Bitcoin ATM, or the strange animatronic dinosaur park. There are tragic moments, such as when Jude shows us only the eviction notice while the man is hanging himself. And then there is the ending sequence, which says more than any character in the entire film. A series of still shots around the city, we finally escape Orsolia's perspective, or the perspective of any one individual. It's as if Jude is inviting us to look outside ourselves and consider what responsibilities we have to one another and what our priorities should be as a society. I'm giving Kontinental 25 4.5 out of 5 stars. It is currently out in limited release. It is hard to put into words exactly what Do You Love Me is and the feelings it evokes, because the film itself uses so few words. An expertly crafted tonal essay that brings together thousands of different Lebanese films, TV shows, newsreels, and other forms of media to tell the story of the city of Beirut, Do You Love Me is a film about the collective trauma of an entire people. As Sarah Khalil writes in her fantastic review of the film for The New Arab, as images of Beirut accumulate in Do You Love Me, they do so without chronology or hierarchy, folding weddings into bombed streets, seaside afternoons into televised air raids, and moments of intimacy into scenes of rupture, until memory itself begins to feel like the organizing principle rather than history. While I was at first worried that removing the context from all of these images, especially the violent ones, would dampen the film's impact, ultimately, the struggle to grasp at their meaning is the point. The juxtaposition between the beauty of Beirut's people and culture with the tremendous violence visited upon them by Israel and other forces is the point. Some of the only text in the film comes at the very beginning, the most important of which is these 2 lines. In Lebanon, contemporary history is not taught in schools, and the disorientation is part of the journey. Welcome to Lebanon. While this isn't a traditional documentary that delivers the cold hard facts of Lebanese history, it attempts to recreate what it has felt like to live through it. The experienced director Lana Daher creates by piecing together all of these individual works into a chaotic whole is one that I will not soon forget. But her project has also had two incredible important byproducts as well. First, she has treated the history of Beirut and the Lebanese people as a story worthy of preserving and learning from. Through making this film, she has assembled an indispensable media archive. And second, though the film may not give its viewers many answers about the history they are witnessing, coming out of Do You Love Me, you are filled with an immediate desire to learn more about that history. Through an exhaustive list of every piece of media used in the film that can be found on the film's website, you can discover the rich history of Lebanese cinema, music, and other forms of media. Film doesn't always have to give us all the answers. Sometimes it is enough to inspire our curiosity and our empathy. Do You Love Me is a great example of that. I'm giving Do You Love Me 4 out of 5 stars. It is currently in its festival run.
It was hard to pick films that I saw. I feel like I just saw so many. I mean, I saw 27, and there were really only a couple that I didn't like. They were all great, but I think the one that really stood out to me, if I had to pick one, was Short Summer, which we were just talking about, directed by Nastia Korkia, who's a Russian-born director. It was a debut film, and I found that to be particularly impressive, or a debut feature film, and it was my understanding that it was based on her childhood memories of an idyllic summer spent in the countryside at her grandparents' house in Russia, but during the Second Chechen War. So I would describe it as an ambient war film, which, as far as I know, I've never really seen anything like that before. It's almost like I don't know if you could call it a new genre, but it was very, very impressionistic and dreamlike, and it was really just an unforgettable sensory experience. The sound design was particularly immersive, and it's such a beautiful film, and it's really just like one painterly composition after another, and it's very meditative and contemplative. And it's interesting because it's from a 8-year-old girl's point of view. The main character is named Katya, and she's just enjoying her childhood during this summer, but it's almost like time has been suspended. And then in the background you can hear the war, but there's never anything depicted, or there's nothing graphic, but it's sort of the shadow of the war is kind of hanging over the story the whole time, and it's very haunting. But then it's also so beautiful, and it almost was kind of seemed like almost like a long form ASMR video. I found it to be particularly entrancing and luminous, and I was just like completely drawn in from the first minute. It's like one of those films that just kind of envelops you, and you just, it just really pulls you into this world, and I was just absolutely blown away, and especially for a first-time film. Our first feature film. I guess if I had to, not to like oversimplify it or really reduce it, but it made me think of if like Claire Denis and Michael Haneke collaborated on a film, it might look something like this. It's yeah. So
I can see it. Yeah, the depiction of violence in the film is quite stark, and it comes out of nowhere.
Yep, exactly, and because it's so beautiful and composed, and all of a sudden there's just like these hints of brutality and violence that are just all the more shocking for the contrasts. Then it's the narrative is very elliptical, and it's like a very more of a sensory experience, and you sort of get these fleeting impressions of reality and mood, and then then you sort of slowly sort of piece together like what is going on, and then her grandparents are also going through a divorce, and so there's like all these things in the background, and then the war, and it just the way it's so intricately woven together, and it was beautiful. And I know in the festival description, it was described as something of a companion piece to Elem Klimov's Come and See, which is considered by many to be the most brutal anti-war film ever made, which I saw for the first time actually just last year at the Cinematheque. So it was kind of interesting they're very, very different, because I feel like this is almost sort of like the inverse of that film, because that's a film that is like just just emotionally shattering and devastating. But then it's also kind of otherworldly, and also almost like seeing war through a child's eyes. So there's this sort of, it's brutal, but then there's also this kind of, it's also very beautiful at the same time. But that's where it's like the war and the brutality is more at the front, and then it's kind of at the edges. It has this sort of kind of otherworldly, surreal quality, and so this is kind of the opposite, where it's like this film is very otherworldly and beautiful, but then the war is and the brutality is kind of in the background. So I feel like that would actually be a pretty amazing double feature, even though it might be kind of emotionally draining. But
I'm not picking a feature. I'm picking the shorts program that was on Sunday morning, April 12th at the Bartell Theater. It was called Tom Palazzolo's America. This was a Chicago Film Archive screening that was hosted and projected by Olivia Babler and Justin Dean, I believe. It's basically like a continuation of what they did with this Heather McAdams program last year. It was all archival stuff from various decades. And then they also had this 2023 program that I believe was called Tap Dancing Teens and Screaming Sandwich Men. That was at the Cinematheque. And those were projected on 16 millimeter, but this was on DCP. I had to pull Mike King aside and ask about the format because I was curious, because it wasn't listed in the guide or on the Eventive site. So I'm like, was that DCP, or were they actually projected on like reels? And he's like, no, those were DCPs. But Tom Palazzolo's work is mostly short documentary, but he ventures into more experimental territory at times. And all the films in this program were from the 1970s, with the exception of the last one called Hey Girls, which is like a student collaborative project with Heather McAdams, who I just mentioned. She's on camera, she stars in the film, and she basically is pitching these various ways to fend off catcallers in your car. Super charming short. It's only like 4 minutes or 4 or 5 minutes. The bulk of the program, the films were quite a bit longer than that. The main one I loved was called Love It, Leave It. And then the other one I want to mention is called Marquette Part 2. And those are from 1973 and 1978, respectively. Love It, Leave It is the most radical work. It's not like a straightforward documentary. It's like a montage of various footage. I guess the primary anchor point is this Naked City contest in Indiana, which is intercut and recontextualized with this audio that's promoting like all these newfangled features of like a new car models. And there's also military parades that are juxtaposed with like street performing clowns. But the real star of the film is the sound collage, which reminded me of this band, the United States of America, pretty famous experimental psychedelic rock band from the late 60s. I mean, I'd love to watch the film again. It's apparently available on the Chicago Film Archive site. The Marquette Part 2 film is more of just like a standard documentary. It's at a Nazi rally in Chicago on July 9th, 1978. What's kind of wild, like the opening shot of the film, it's 47 years ago, or 48 years ago, nearly. There's a kid who's wearing a Palestine flag shirt in the opening shot, and it's just like a shot with this gathering of people on the street before the protest of the rally that's taking place, and it held a lot of power for me, and I was not expecting that at all, to see that. But once the film kind of goes into its main section, you're getting like this behind-the-scenes look, and that's like a whole other conversation that I thought was interesting, just to think about the access that Tom Palazzolo had with these neo-Nazis, these bumbling like dozen or so mediocre, undereducated white men in like a conference room trying to plan something and fumbling for some kind of relevance. And as the film goes on, or the way the film is edited together, you can sort of see that that's just what the lead organizer, I don't think his name was mentioned more than one time, but I didn't catch his first name. I think his last name is Cullen. But he's like, I just want to be heard. And the police presence there for the rally prevented them from being heard, because of just the commotion is kind of just like absurdist in that way. There are a lot of terrific shots in the film. There's like this standoff between a black construction worker and a cop, and they're like staring each other down. The cop's in riot gear. It's a very powerful image, and there's nothing being said, and there's like a kind of a crowd of people around them. There's also a shot of this woman just screaming at the top of her lungs, like death to the Nazis. She's like at the crowd control barrier. It's also quite powerful. And just kind of, also the vibe you get is just like the nonchalance of everything going on in what Tom Palazzolo, and I think he might have a co-director on this film, but I apologize, I don't have it written down, but it's just like, it's very telling, and it just also speaks to what's been happening in this country in the Trump era.
Yeah. You're saying that a Nazi rally?
Yeah. I mean, there was a Nazi rally in Madison. I think, was it 2 years ago or maybe even last year?
I think it was last
It was like a Saturday morning, and they just like marched through a neighborhood.
And then they ran away in a U-Haul or something weird.
But yeah, I mean, so there's no immediate threat of violence, but obviously they're promoting violence. But it's just kind of captured in this like very verite style way that's has a humor about it that's fascinating. There's a lot of dichotomy in what's going on, and I'd love to watch that again too. Obviously, you're not going to be able to go to a normal theater to see these again, but I guess you might be able to find them on the collections.chicagofilmarchive.org.
My next film is The Stranger, directed by François Ozon, who's been kind of a favorite of the festival in the Cinematheque over the years, so I always enjoy his films and try to take the opportunity to see them on the big screen when I can. So this was one when I, not only because of the director, but also because I assume most people had to read The Stranger, L'Étranger in high school, and ever since I read it, it's always been one of my favorite books. So I was like, okay, one of my favorite French directors, one of my favorite books. Like, this is a no-brainer. I was pretty, my expectations were pretty high for this, and it ended up being my second favorite film of the festival, I would say. It really blew me away. I assume most people are familiar with the premise, but in case anyone hasn't read the book, it's considered a classic of existentialist literature, published in 1942. The basic premise is that it's set in 1940s French colonial Algeria, and an ordinary detached office worker is unwittingly drawn into a senseless murder on a sun-drenched beach. And so this is a new adaptation, and it's filmed in lustrous black and white. I think what really blew me away about it is that this is a book that I've read countless times. I became kind of obsessed with it when I first discovered it in high school, and I've written essays about it. I've thought a lot about it, and it's actually been several years since I've read it. But I feel like this film is probably one of the best literary adaptations or best film adaptations of a work of literature I've ever seen, because not only did it really brought the book to life for me, but then it also really kind of updated it and imbued sort of like a contemporary perspective into the themes of anti-colonialism and racism. And I feel like it really, not only was it faithful to the source material and it brought it to life, but then it also updated it for 21st century audiences. And so not only just on a artistic level, it was just a masterpiece. I mean, it's a painstakingly crafted period piece. I mean, it's just like you felt like you were there. It felt like very vivid and realistic in every way, but then it was just beautifully shot. I love contemporary black and white films, and so it was just, I mean, on that level, it was just, impeccable. As I was watching it, I actually felt like passages from the book were like coming back to my mind, and I also feel like seeing this adaptation sort of gave me a newfound appreciation for the book, and sort of it made me look at the book in a totally new way. One significant departure from the book that I think was really interesting is like one of the critiques of the book is that, and I think this is part of part of the point. But like, for example, the person who is murdered in the book is an Arab, but and I think he's referred to as the Arab like 25 times, and it doesn't even have a name in the book. And for the most part, Algeria and the native population is just invisible. And so this movie definitely kind of took liberties with that and changed, and not only gave the character a name, but like really focused more on the Algerian people, and really sort of heightened the anti-colonial subtext of it, and kind of brought that more to the forefront, while also still being very faithful to the story. And because I think the line that really stood out to me, and sort of like the essence of the novel. I mean, Albert Camus, the original author of the book, he described The Stranger as he said it was about the nakedness of man faced with the absurd. And when the main character Meursault is in prison after he commits the crime, he's talking to his lawyer, and he's explaining to him that he's not the first French person to kill an Arab, and he won't be the last one. So he's not, like, ostensibly he's on trial for committing murder, but of course it's a colonial Algeria, so he's not actually being tried for killing an Arab. It's more about the book starts with his mother passing away, and him attending the funeral, and he doesn't act the way that society expects him to act, and he doesn't properly mourn his mother, and so he ends up really being tried for his character and his really not conforming to like the intricate, well-oiled machinery of capitalist society and colonial society. So it's like so that ends up being really what the trial is about. And I don't know, I feel like this seeing this adaptation just really brought that home for me and made me really realize how I mean, it's really like very Kafkaesque. Like it really reminded me of the trial. Because as I know, Kafka was a huge influence on Camus, but seeing this film really made me realize how he really kind of wove that in there with the imagery, and it felt much more dystopian than I remembered it. And just like I thought it was brilliant the way that he not only like incorporated the like the Algerian perspective more, but then it was also subtly kind of queer coded and really just updated it in a lot of really interesting ways. And then also with the music choices, I found particularly interesting. I hope this isn't a spoiler, but in the end, the choice of the end credit music I thought was brilliant because it seems out of tone with the rest of the movie, but he chose the song "Killing an Arab," which is actually the debut single by The Cure. Which was about the stranger, but at the time it was controversial because it was taken out of context as, you know, obviously it's not a xenophobic song, but people who hadn't read the book or didn't get the reference. But I remember in my AP World Literature class in high school where I read the book, our teacher played that song for us and like gave us a printout with the lyrics. So in a lot of ways, seeing this film was sort of like coming full circle back to my education, and the way obviously he chose that and then, you know, woven all these elements that are not in the original text. And there's also a book that was published a few years ago by an Algerian author called the Meursault Investigation by an Algerian journalist named Kamel Daoud. And so it actually imagines the stranger, but from the perspective of the brother of the murder victim and kind of like how it affected their lives. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like even though the book isn't mentioned in The Stranger, I feel like Ozon was taking all of these things and their critiques and sort of weaving them in. And then also the composer of the score is, this was a pleasant surprise because I didn't know this until the end, but one of my favorite musicians, Fatima Al-Qadiri, who is a Kuwaiti musician, DJ, and conceptual artist. And so she did the score. And so I feel like obviously it was a deliberate choice, you know, to choose her to do the score, and you know, and then have it just I feel like it's one of those movies that for me is like a true work of art where just nothing is arbitrary. Like every choice, like every detail, just you know, somehow serves the themes and just like the vision of the movie. And I was just I just loved it. That was just again, it was one I had pretty high expectations for, and it really just totally delivered on every level and was even better than I expected it to be. But that's a good one.